it's always an exciting challenge with Zoom to figure out what screen is going to show up where when you're doing your PowerPoint shuffle. Oh, so there it is. So what I got to do, this doesn't work. I'll move this over to here and get on to the correct place to share. Oh, I need to enable screen sharing from our friend, the host. But anyways, I'll start talking anyways, and we'll just catch up with where I am with the slides. Let me just ask for that. So this is a talk, I call it Beyond DevOps Metrics because I like a dramatic title. But what I want to do is go over sort of like 3 types of metrics that I've seen people using when they're doing, whether it's, the joke of the title is it's a lot more than DevOps, right? Whenever they're going through improving how they do their software, their digital transformation, changing over to a lot of the new things that we're focusing on in VMware. I work in the VMware Tanzu part. And that is, how do we modernize the applications that we have to run on, container-based architecture, to run on Kubernetes, or things like the Tanzu application service, the Cloud Foundry-based thing that we have. And when we move over to this new way of doing applications where we're running every week, we're deploying every week and things like that, there's a different set of metrics that get added to a lot of the same metrics that you would be monitoring in a traditional infrastructure operations way of looking at things. So let me introduce myself a little bit. I'm Michael Cote. Everyone calls me Cote because there's always a lot of Michaels around, which is fine. But I've been really fortunate to work for, I guess, 2015. I can't do math on the fly because I have a philosophy degree, but for quite some time at Pivotal and now at VMware. And I've gotten to really study and research and also talk with and help out how large organizations are getting better at the way that they do software. And I've been able to write several books or booklets along the way. You can get those for free. You would be able to see this if I could share here, but you can get it for free if you go to cote.io/books or just cote.io, and you can download those. I also do a lot of podcasts. I do one called Tanzu Talk over at tanzutalk.com. I just did a little live streaming thing before this talk here, but I go over a lot of I don't know, there's really short ones that are fun and jumpy and things like that, but longer ones where I discuss what does it look like when an organization transforms the way that they develop software, the way that they run their software, to, as I'll get to, really get to that point where software is the core way that they're operating and innovating their business, to be like a tech company, as people used to fancy saying it. And I've been an industry analyst and worked in M&A at Dell, and I was a programmer a long time ago. But that background has always informed a lot of the work that I do, which again is really focused on being interested in how large organizations do their own software, write their own software that helps run their business and how they get better at it. And in particular, when it comes to metrics, if you could see my screen, there's a fantastic picture of an old BladeLogic poster that I took when I was I worked at BMC Software, and I think I went to go visit there, and it's a great sort of 2000s era poster. But I actually worked at BMC for quite some time on exactly these kinds of things, right? I worked on the rewrite of Patrol, and I implemented a lot of monitoring and collecting metrics, doing reports with them. A lot of other stuff goes into, I think they call it Performance Manager, but it's similar to a lot of the monitoring and or observability, as well as people like to call it. But it was a great firsthand experience of what those metrics are, what's valuable, how to collect them, what to do with them. That makes this topic always interesting to me. So there's 3 buckets that I want to look at for metrics. And those buckets are the DevOps or the technical metrics. And these are the metrics that most people think about all of the time. It occurs to me, let me very quickly, I think I could set something up so that I can get my screen shared here. I'll turn off my my music so you don't have to listen to that, but let me just start the virtual camera. And probably what I can do anyways. And then the other bucket of metrics is metrics that are related to the business, right? And if you think about, the goals of digital transformation, these are the metrics that start to get really interesting, right? That I enjoy kind of tracking and that are a lot more valuable than just performance metrics, if you will. All right, so let me move this over here, and we're going to do a little crazy hacking here. Thanks to me doing live streaming, it's not really hacking, but thanks to me doing live streaming, I can actually share the screen that I have, and you can see my wonderful slides, my beloved, fantastic, wonderful slides. So let me show you this. Here's the fun joke, that great poster. But let's go back to the actual content here. Let me expand this out a lot so that you can see it, magnify in there. All right. So as I was mentioning, what we have here are three buckets. There's the business metrics, the technical metrics, and then the area that I focus a lot on in the work that I do is the cultural metrics, which are the least kind of fleshed out, more difficult metrics to go over. But thinking beyond just the technical metrics, thinking about the business metrics and the cultural metrics become very important when you really are thinking about how you're evolving the way you do your own software, how you're getting better at software that helps run the business. And let me give you an example of what I mean by that, because I keep saying the same thing over and over again. But what I mean is, the need with your own software to start having a really good ability to write software and do it on more than like a long 12-month cycle, the project way of delivering it. And in the same way that us tech companies and the big social media companies and things like that, their software is always evolving and there's new features that are getting added. And it's really the way that their customers interact with their business and the way that their business operates internally facing as well, which is what we're all about in the VMware Tanzu area, helping organizations modernize their own software and get really good at running their software. And importantly, when you kind of reach that even intermediate maturity, it starts to get to the point where your business is changed and made better by your ability to do software. So here's an example from a tax agency. It's the American Revenue Collection Agency, the IRS. I forget what y'all call it in the UK. It's like it has an equally ominous name. It's like Inland Revenue or something like that. But it's the agency that collects taxes. Now, sometimes people, I don't know why, they forget to pay their taxes on time and you get a penalty every day. So if you want to pay that tax off, you're incented to figure out exactly how much it is that day and pay those taxes. Now, traditionally, before making a software version of it, the IRS had call centers. And call centers, I don't know if you've used the phone recently to call someone, but they're really annoying to use. It's bad customer experience, right? And they're also expensive to staff because it involves people. As much as I like people, being one myself, they are one of the more expensive ways to do things. And also because of that, right? Like the other issue that the IRS was having was that the availability, if you will, of that service was about 37%, meaning that, that would be 63% of the time people couldn't get through. This is an independent group that studied this, either that kind of timed out and they were hung up on, or someone just like got frustrated, the hold times were too long. But it was overall an expensive, bad customer experience. So they wanted to replace it with software. So their initial idea, and I'm going over this example so you can see why you start tracking different metrics, especially the business and the cultural ones. Their initial idea was that we will list, as you see here, all of the transactions that people have had with the IRS. It's like logging into Facebook or your photos and reliving your moments, all of the various things, which is kind of the first intuition that we would have, right? Let's just make an app so people can sign in and they'll find what their balance is, as we have highlighted here in orange. But because they were getting better at software and they were taking a product approach to it, because they had the process to be able to think about doing things in this way, they got that in front of users, and they discovered that when they prototyped this out with users, that people still couldn't really find out how much they owed, and they didn't have enough confidence to pay things online and use the software. And many people still wanted to call up to the call center. So you can kind of see how that would be a failure of the business case of the whole project if they delivered that on a traditional 12-month cycle, right? They had this idea, this assumption of how things were going, but it didn't actually work out for them when they tested it. But because they had a more iterative, a more product-based approach, the kind of thing we work with people in our Tanzu Labs division, they were able to very early on catch that this was not the best way to implement it. And they worked and came up with new designs and validated it with, observing users. And they saw that when you want to know how much money you owe the IRS, all you want to know is how much money you owe the IRS. So they created a workflow that was basically just showing you only that. And they gave people the confidence to pay their taxes online, not call the call center. And these figures of success are pretty old, but you can see that it drove a whole bunch of new revenue. You can imagine improved the customer experience a great deal. And they were able to get features, releases down from basically doing it every 2 years to every 9 weeks, right? And that's because they were following this new kind of cloud native product way of thinking about doing software. And that's what we see with a lot of the large organizations I talk with and the customers I speak with. This kind of thing is the goal, right? Where they can release their software every week or two, right? Or even, a magnitude less than 2 years for sure. So they start getting this feedback loop and they can constantly be improving their software and really get to the state where their software embodies what their business does. And you can imagine if you can release once a week or multiple times a week, you can start to change how the business is operating. So this brings in the need for a new way of thinking about metrics, right? Because people in operations, developers, and the managers of all of that, they're not just paying attention to their part of the scheme, right? Do we have good uptime and even resilience, to use an SRE word, for the applications running? But does it matter, right? Are we bringing business value with our process? And also, as I'll get into, as a manager, as the architect, the programmer of an organization, if you will, have I architected the organization well, the roles and responsibilities, the culture, if you will, to be effective, right? And this loop of constantly studying if you're being effective, of gathering metrics, is a key part of organizations that are successful at getting better at software, doing digital transformation stuff. So this is by no means an exhaustive list, but what I want to do is go over some of the baseline features that when people are moving to this way of doing development, what they pay attention to. And the first ones are the pretty standard ones that you can encounter. You can see it's very hard to find these screenshots of the old way of doing metrics. I think I probably programmed some of these screens way back when. But these metrics aren't to the exclusion of your standard monitoring metrics, your gauges, seeing how things are going, but they're additive to the things that you start to monitor and you start to react to. Now, these are the four primary ones that come up over and over again and kind of proved out in DevOps studies, the DevOps reports, to be valuable. And that is, so think about why you're monitoring these. One is deployment frequency. How frequently are you deploying software? How frequently do you get new features into production, right? What is the cadence that you have features in there, right? And this is almost the whole point of things, in addition to the next one, that we want to be able to modify our software in order to improve the way the business is functioning and also change the way the business is functioning. So monitoring that becomes very key. You want to figure out what the baseline is there and make sure that you don't kind of get into the red with that at the very least. Similar, having lead time, the idea of how long does it take from coming up with an idea to actually getting that change in there, right? Kind of a more focused time of the cycle that it takes. That allows you to monitor kind of a vital component of getting new features out there. And then another key shift that's very uncomfortable for most people to think about is that a lot of what you're doing with cloud native stacks, right? Stacks that are running on Kubernetes and then the applications architected in a cloud native way, is you are building a system that is accepting of the idea that failure will occur, right? And this allows all sorts of interesting optimizations in how you run things. It allows you to move a lot faster and deploy more frequently, because built into the system, I mean, one of the things that's fundamental about how Kubernetes works is the ability to roll back a lot of changes, the ability to run multiple versions of things, and resiliency built into the system. So you start to monitor your ability to do that, which is to say your ability not to have uptime, but to roll back, to restore services becomes an important thing to monitor. And then, of course, you have the change failure rate, which is another way of monitoring how whenever we deploy software, how frequently do errors occur, right? And you want to kind of come in, and you always will have failures. Well, I shouldn't say always. Well, there's some other audio coming in. I guess I'm going to assume that I should just keep talking, which is fine for me. So you have these metrics that you start to monitor. Let me check in here. Oh, I see what happened. Sorry, that was my bad. I had the conference open somewhere else, so I heard it. Anyways, there's some other metrics you can look up that are actually good technical metrics based on SRE, site reliability engineering metrics. But let me move on here. So the next type of metrics to look at are the business metrics. And this is where you start to see one of the improvements, the differences that you have when it comes to doing cloud native style development and thinking, right? Again, improving the way that you do your software. And that is that us in IT, not only operators, not only developers, but kind of everyone involved in there, we are given the chance to have more responsibility, more ownership, a larger part to play in the business, the way that software is used, right? Again, we are the developers are writing how the implementation of the business, they're helping modify it, and operations people are running that, and also a vital part of how the business actually runs, not just getting a blinking cursor up or a dial tone, as people like to say, up and running. You've got to go way beyond that dial tone. And you actually have a chance to have more of a role there. So that means paying attention to how your efforts, your work is affecting the business becomes important. And I think this is, I'm making a big effort to point this out, because in surveys, you can see that not that many developers say they measure, success based on the business metrics, right? The business value that they bring. There's a fair amount of monitoring, usage and things like that occurs, but it's not the focus that I think it should be. I mean, to some extent, once you get past the software actually works, which is a very valuable feature of software that is easy to lose track of, the best metric to pay attention to is it useful? Is it bringing value? So this is where you have to think about what your business is and start to monitor and track metrics. Now, there's a few common metrics, right, with software. It's often around completing a task, right? Going through a workflow, whether it's buying something, doing some paperwork with the government, or you can think internally, doing kind of like loan approvals and things like that. There's also metrics about how the business is functioning, right? Like what it costs per transaction, how long something takes, right? Because you always, you don't want to pay too much. So you want to make sure that you're not, that something isn't costing too much to do. So you can start to think about, for every transaction we do, how much is that costing? And finally, it's good to monitor overall customer experience and satisfaction. And this can be very annoying when you get a bunch of pop-ups that are always asking you to do a survey and things like that. So you can definitely get survey fatigue, but you do want to monitor some way of figuring out if people are happy with the experience or not. I know that definitely there's all sorts of enterprise sort of software suites that I need to use that I would love to give some feedback on about my customer experience for it. But I am rarely given the chance to do that. But anyways, so you want to pay attention to these metrics and see if they are something that that you can use to determine if your efforts in doing development and even operations are being done well, not just the technical things. Now, there's one that I want to highlight, and it's hard to fit it into one of these buckets, but it is a business metric in relation to the capabilities you've built into the organization, right? So the way that I've come to think about the job of executives, of managers, when it comes to all of the change to how IT is run, particularly how organizations are using their own software, is I metaphorically think of those executives as the architects, even the developers of an organization, right? So they are building the system that creates the software and runs that software, their organization, and the norms of how people work. And they are responsible ultimately for that whole system, right? That's their job. And one of the things that I think a lot of us are trying to get those executives to pay attention to more are the legacy software and services, the stacks that they have. They're existing stuff that has been neglected for a while because it doesn't really seem like anyone's responsibility. And there's often some clamoring from the lower level, the developers and people, to say that we have old infrastructure and it's slowing down our ability to add new features. So we should stop delivering new features for a little while and modernize that infrastructure. Which is basically to say the business can't evolve and we can't add new features. And we're going to spend a lot of time and money on something that doesn't actually change what the screens look like. It doesn't move pixels around on the screen, which is a very hard thing for the business side and executives to come up to. But what we're seeing now, and part of why we in VMware Tanzu are like helping out people with this, is many organizations have been ignoring this for far too long, as you can see here, and they're stuck. Right. So they do need to figure out a method to start modernizing what they're doing and also give themselves the ability to add new features as well. And there's some great methodologies that we've worked on over the years, kind of selectively picking small projects so that you can actually be delivering new features while you're modernizing at the same time. You know, there's nothing magical about it. It just kind of is setting the right expectations and doing the right kind of analysis to pick what to modernize. So that you then get the flexibility to kind of move out of this trap, if you will. So that gets to the last part before I wrap up here, which is thinking about, so if you're architecting what the organization looks like, you want to think about how can I monitor as a manager, as a change agent, as an executive, how can I monitor if the culture change, if the organization change is successful, right? So we're already monitoring if the change that we're putting in place for our applications is effective, right? We're paying more attention to the business side of things. When we if you remember to the IRS example, when we change what a screen looks like, does it have a business impact? Does it make it so people call the call center less? We have operational changes because of the way we're deploying more frequently, the way we're doing software, right? Do we have a better MTTR, mean time to repair? How frequently can we deploy stuff? But equally, we need to look at, as we change our goals, as we change the organization, how can we monitor those metrics? And these metrics are a lot harder to monitor because you're essentially monitoring yourself. You're monitoring people and the organization effectiveness. Now, obviously, if you're failing at those other two metrics, or they're in the red, something is maybe not working with your culture, your organization side. But I think there's some other metrics that you can start to monitor that I've seen people using. Now, one of the better ones is monitoring employee net promoter score. Now, NPS is essentially, it's an overly complicated way of scoring and weighting if someone would recommend a product or a service to a friend or a family member. So it's not just their experience doing it or their desire, it's them putting their reputation on the line with their loved ones and their friends to say, oh, you should use this product or service. Now, I think that's a great way of rating things because it's not just an individual experience, that you put a lot more thinking into it. Now, employee NPS is a version of, are you enjoying the way things are going? Do you feel that we're doing things as best possible here, such that you would recommend a friend or a family member working here, right? So that is a big, it's a way of getting employees to say, we think this is a good place to work and things are going well here. So that's a good metric to start measuring. Now, another one that's more difficult to measure is, especially when you're going through change, a lot of the issue that you have is people don't have belief in what you're doing. They're not bought into it. So figuring out a way to measure that, and it could just be a survey question, becomes vital. And you want to, of course, see people having belief in not only the strategy, but also the leaders, the mission. You want them to be on board with that and think that you're doing the right thing. And then finally, if you think about going through every week that iteration of what the software looks like, coming up with a new theory of how it should be working with the IRS, starting to monitor how many experiments you do, not necessarily releases, but how much learning are we getting? How many things are we trying? That becomes very vital, right? Because if you're not trying new things, if your organization is not going through and experimenting, you're not really going to be learning anything. You're not going to be improving, and you're going to be back to delivering static software that doesn't really change, despite being able to release software more frequently. And then finally, as with anything, but especially when you're going through change, it's really important to pay attention to retention and the churn rate that you have. Are people staying with you? Are they leaving? I find when I've had jobs that I don't like, and I want to move on, people send me surveys like I either don't answer them or I just don't care, right? Like if I'm already not bought into a job, I'm not going to tell you that I'm not interested in it. And so paying attention to the churn rate and the staff retention will get you it's what do they call that? A trailing indicator, but you add that into everything else and it will give you a good sense of how your change is going. Now, finally, I think it's really important to have metrics for your metrics, if you will, and to pay very close attention to if the metrics that you're spending the time to gather, report on, and think about are still useful. Are they being used or not? Right? You need to find these zombie metrics that you have. And very regularly, I would say, especially when you're starting, look through all the metrics at the beginning, think if they're valuable to collect or not, because it's going to be a huge distraction, a huge time suck. It's not only gathering the metrics, but it's looking at them, thinking about them, and then responding to those metrics, right? So you want to make sure that you're not, that you're eliminating metrics that don't really matter, that you get rid of them. And large organizations, just as with legacy software, they're really good at accumulating metrics and just filling up dashboards with the yellow, red, and green metrics. But you really have to garden that ongoing. Maybe initially, you do your initial analysis, maybe every 3 months, you go in and visit things to see if they're effective. And then maybe at some point you get to a 6 or 12 month cycle to make sure, again, that the system you've built is a valuable one and that it works out well. Well, sorry for a little bit of weirdness in there, here and there in the middle. But hopefully you've gotten a sense of so if you're kind of on you're getting to that point where you're transforming how the organization works, what they're doing, you're getting much better at software. There's a different set of metrics than you're probably using across, the technical, the business, and the cultural area to start paying attention to make sure that you're doing things that are valuable, and to give you that feedback to really guide how to determine how to go forward and how to operate, and how to get to that point where, as we saw with the IRS, you deliver software that actually has an impact, that actually brings business value, and isn't kind of the typical sort of why does the software not work that you have with the more traditional way of doing things. So hopefully those are some metrics you can start with. Now, I'm always easy to get a hold of. Most of what I do is just talking with people and finding out what's worked for them, and kind of gathering that together and reporting it back to people. So I'm always happy to talk with people, and I'm pretty easy to get a hold of. So with that, thanks for having me, and enjoy the rest of the show there. And I'll see everyone next time. Bye-bye.